the silent ritual of marking doorframes to ward off bad harvests. Imagine yourself in a rural European village hundreds of years ago. The year has turned late, and the days now grow shorter, shadows lengthening across narrow lanes of packed earth. The air is thick with the scent of last autumn's leaves, slowly decaying where they gather near stone walls and timbered porches. In the pale blue hush before dawn, or under the protective cloak of night, the village settles into a silence that feels deeper than the darkness itself. Inside these humble homes, families are winding down after another long day of labor. The fire has burned low, leaving just a few faintly glowing coals in the hearth. Children doze beneath rough-woven blankets. Yet in some households, a quiet, anxious energy persists. The rhythm of their lives, so often ruled by weather and earth, has shifted in the face of uncertainty. The memory of past years, when blight crept silently through fields of barley, or a sudden storm destroyed the ripening grain, lingers in every cautious glance and whispered prayer. In these moments, a silent ritual begins. It is not a public ceremony, nor one prescribed by the church or town authority. Instead, it is a private, deeply rooted practice. One passed quietly from mother to daughter, from neighbor to trusted friend. Perhaps the father, or the eldest son, or the housewife herself, steps softly to the storeroom, retrieves a small fragment of chalk or a piece of white clay. The shape of the object is unremarkable, yet it carries with it a sense of hope, mingled with desperation. Moving through the dim light, careful not to wake sleeping children or alert curious neighbors, the householder approaches the doorframe. The wood of the lintel is rough, bearing the marks of years, scratches, stains, the weather's patient touch. The householder's hand is steady, practiced. A symbol is drawn, slow and deliberate. Perhaps a cross, perhaps a looping sign that to outsiders means nothing, or a string of lines resembling ancient runes. The choice of symbol varies by region, by family, even by whim, but all share the same intent: to shield the home, and most importantly, the precious stores of grain within, from whatever unseen forces might threaten them. No words are spoken. This is not an act meant for the daylight, nor for the approval of priests. Rather, it is a conversation with the unknown, an appeal to forces both feared and barely understood. Some symbols are meant to invite divine protection, invoking saints or ancient spirits. Others are shaped to confuse or deter malign entities, to create a barrier that misfortune cannot cross. In truth, the lines between faith, superstition, and habit blur in these quiet moments, becoming one seamless strand in the fabric of survival. It is easy to overlook such a small act, to dismiss it as mere tradition or the remnant of a vanished age. But for these villagers, the ritual holds real significance. The memory of hunger, of cupboards emptied by mold, of grain spoiled by an invisible hand, runs deep. Famine is not a distant specter, but a regular visitor, arriving on silent feet when a harvest fails. In these times, the smallest gesture can feel like an act of agency, a way to push back, however subtly, against forces that seem vast and indifferent. As you imagine yourself watching from the threshold, notice the gentle scrape of chalk on wood, the hush in the air, the way the night seems to hold its breath. There is comfort in repetition. Year after year, these marks are renewed, layered over one another until the wood itself becomes a palimpsest of fears and hopes. Some families whisper prayers as they work, while others maintain an even more solemn silence, believing words might draw unwanted attention. Outside, the village remains quiet, save for the occasional call of a night bird or the distant rustle of wind in the grain fields. The night is both shield and witness, hiding these rituals from the judgment of neighbors and from the watchful eyes of the authorities. In some places, local priests tolerate these customs, recognizing their power to soothe anxious hearts. In others, such rituals are condemned as pagan or foolish, driving the practice further underground. Yet, regardless of official opinion, the chalk continues to appear. An unspoken agreement between generations. Over time, these simple symbols gather meaning. They are more than just lines. They become stories. An old mark, faded and weathered, might recall the year when blight ruined half the valley's wheat, or when a single marked house was mysteriously spared. Sometimes, chalk is replaced with ashes from the hearth, or a smudge of flour, or even the juice of an onion. The material hardly matters. What matters is the act itself, the sense of doing something, however small, to safeguard what little can be controlled. In the broader sweep of history, these rituals rarely appear in written records. Chroniclers and scholars of the age were more likely to note the grand gestures of kings and wars, the building of cathedrals, or the arrival of plague. Yet, it is in these small, habitual acts that we glimpse the quiet resilience of ordinary people. Their inventiveness, their blend of faith and pragmatism, their ability to create meaning where so much seemed governed by fate. Even today, traces of such customs persist. In some regions, old farmhouses still bear marks above their doors, sometimes dismissed as carpenters' doodles, sometimes quietly maintained by new generations who may not recall their original purpose. Folklorists collecting stories in the 19th and 20th centuries were often surprised to find these traditions alive, shaped and reshaped by time, yet still whispering of the fears and hopes of those who first traced symbols on wood, in the silent hours before dawn. As the night deepens, the ritual ends as quietly as it began. The chalk is hidden away. The householder returns to bed, perhaps no less anxious, but a little more at peace. The rhythm of their lives continues, planting, tending, harvesting, storing. The coming year will bring its own challenges and, perhaps, its own need for small acts of faith. Yet, in the act of marking a doorframe, something is reclaimed, a sense of presence, of intention, even in the face of forces beyond understanding. So as you drift in thought, picture those ancient households surrounded by fields and woods, each one lit by the faint glow of embers and guarded, in its own small way, by a symbol traced in chalk. The silence returns. The village breathes in unison, waiting for dawn, quietly hoping that the harvest will endure.
Hey everyone, tonight we step back into the shadows of medieval life, not into the halls of power or the noise of markets, but into those quiet, hidden moments when true survival was measured by what happened unseen. Forget the battles and royal intrigues for now. Tonight we uncover the small, hushed rituals and secret acts that kept families alive when the world turned cold and resources ran thin. Before you get comfortable, consider liking and subscribing if you genuinely enjoy these slow journeys into forgotten history. Drop a comment sharing where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see our global community. Now, lower the lights, settle in, and let's drift together into the secret reality of medieval survival. The secret bread mills hidden under barn floors at great risk. Imagine yourself standing in the low dawn light of a medieval English village. The air is thick with the scent of dew and last night's ashes, a quiet chill lingering in the stone walls and thatched roofs. All around you, life hums with the gentle rhythm of survival, hens clucking, a distant dog barking, the soft thump of boots in earth that has known centuries of footsteps. Each day here unfolds much as the one before, measured by the toll of the church bell and the slow sweep of the sun. But beneath this daily sameness, something secret stirs in the earth. Beneath the smooth-worn wooden floorboards of an unremarkable barn, away from prying eyes and the ever-present demands of the local lord and church, a faint sound sometimes echoes, soft, regular, and oddly purposeful. It is the hushed, cyclical groan of a clandestine hand mill. Here, a few trusted villagers huddle, grinding grain by the pale light of a tallow candle, their movements deliberate and practiced, their voices no more than a whisper. To understand the quiet urgency of this secret, you need to step into the world of medieval grain and bread. For the peasant, bread was not just food, it was life itself, the constant answer to hunger's call. Each autumn, grain was gathered and stored with care, guarded as fiercely as any treasure. Yet, almost every harvest, a share was claimed by forces beyond the family's reach. The local lord demanded his due in tithes, as did the parish priest. The village mill, often the property of the manor, required payment in coin or a share of the precious flour. Rules were clear, and breaking them carried risks, confiscation, fines, or worse. The official mill, with its heavy stone wheels and steady stream of customers, was watched by the reeve and by informants whose eyes seemed everywhere. But famine, when it arrived, cared little for laws or customs. A stretch of cold, wet seasons or a blight could turn ordinary hunger into crisis. In these years, even the most well-kept stores thinned too quickly, and the prospect of running out of bread was not a distant fear but a daily shadow. It was then that families weighed the cost of obedience against the need to survive. Some, driven by necessity, began to look for ways to keep just a little more grain out of official hands. And so, beneath the floors of barns, chosen for their privacy and the way their musty smell and rough walls disguised human activity, the secret mills were born. Imagine the scene: a dim, cramped hollow beneath the barn floor, shored up with rough planks and lined with sacks of grain. The ceiling is low enough that even a child must crouch, and the only light comes from a lantern carefully shielded with cloth. The air is thick with the scent of ground flour and old straw, muffling footsteps overhead. Here, an old hand mill sits atop a crude platform. It is little more than 2 rough stones, repurposed with quiet ingenuity. The grinding is slow and laborious, nothing like the loud, steady churn of the village water mill. Each turn of the handle is measured, cautious, designed to keep the noise from escaping into the world above. The people who risked these secret mills were not outlaws by nature. They were ordinary villagers, mothers, fathers, grandparents, drawn together by a silent understanding. Each person played a role. One might keep watch, another tend to the mill, another portion out the flour and scatter straw over the boards above to hide any sign of disturbance. It was a system built not for profit or rebellion, but for simple endurance. There was always the risk of discovery. Sometimes, the smell of fresh flour would linger a little too long in the barn. A curious reeve might notice that certain families' loaves seemed unnaturally large, or that fewer grains were making their way to the official tithe. Whispers could spread quickly in the tightly woven fabric of village life. And if a secret mill was found, the consequences could be harsh. Fines were common, but public humiliation was often used as a warning to others. In rare cases, persistent defiance could lead to the loss of one's home or even exile from the community, a severe fate in a world where the land itself was the guarantee of survival. Yet for many, these risks were a shadow that paled beside the certainty of hunger. The rhythm of their lives was shaped by necessity: a day spent in the fields, an evening in silent labor, a night marked by anxious listening for any sound that might betray their secret. There was a kind of solidarity in this quiet defiance. Entire families, and sometimes small groups of neighbors, would rely on these hidden mills to stretch their rations through the hardest weeks of winter or a lean spring when the old grain was nearly gone and the new harvest not yet in sight. In the broader world, the act of secret grinding was known and feared by those in power. Records from manorial courts tell of searches ordered, barns inspected, and even dogs used to sniff out the faint scent of illicit flour. Sometimes, an informant's word was enough to bring suspicion down upon a household, and the community would hold its breath, uncertain who might be questioned next. Yet there are hints in the records, and in the oral histories passed down quietly among descendants, that not all lords were eager to punish. Some looked the other way, understanding that harsh justice might break the fragile fabric of village life. Even so, the culture of secrecy persisted. Stories of the hidden mills became part of the silent knowledge that bound a village together, just as the quiet tapping of the millstones beneath the barn became a heartbeat beneath the steady flow of daily life above. For children growing up in such a household, the memory of crouching in darkness, hands dusted with flour, would linger long after the hard years had passed. Over time, as famine receded and new forms of authority arose, many of these secret mills vanished, their entrances filled in, their stones repurposed or forgotten. Occasionally, in the present day, An old barn is torn down or renovated, and a hidden chamber is found beneath the boards, sometimes still holding a long-abandoned hand mill, rusted and silent. Archaeologists who discover such places find few records, but the very absence of documentation becomes part of the story, a reminder of how survival in the past often depended on what could not be spoken aloud. So the next time you imagine yourself standing in the gentle hush of a medieval barn, remember that beneath your feet may have been not just earth, but a story of quiet resistance and endurance. The rhythm of hidden grinding stones, the hush of voices sworn to secrecy, the careful dance of ordinary people determined to see another season, these are the echoes left behind by the secret bread mills beneath the barn floors, risked for the chance at one more loaf, one more day. As you drift from this story into the quiet of your own thoughts, let the memory of their ingenuity and resilience settle in with you. A gentle rhythm beneath the noise of history, a secret kept in silence, and a reminder of how, in every age, ordinary people have shaped their survival in ways almost invisible, but never forgotten. The hidden caches of salt buried beneath hearthstones. Imagine yourself sitting in the quiet, shadowed kitchen of a medieval cottage, sometime in the later months of the year. Outside, the world is stilled by a lingering dusk, the fields spent and the air thick with the scent of cooling earth and faint wood smoke. The only light comes from the slow, pulsing glow of embers in the hearth, a familiar comfort and in many ways, the true heart of the home. To most, a hearth was warmth and cooking, a gathering place for whispered stories and the slow turning of the year. But beneath the stones of this ordinary fireplace, a secret rested, as vital and coveted as coin, a carefully hidden cache of salt. In an age before refrigeration, salt was far more than a mere seasoning. It was survival itself. Across vast regions, especially in the colder months when green things faded and the world shrank to what could be stored or preserved, salt's crystalline grains held the difference between hunger and plenty. Meat from a slaughtered pig, fish brought in from distant rivers, even the hard-won yield of cheese from goats or cows, all of these depended on salt for their longevity. Without it, food spoiled quickly, especially as winter stretched on, unpredictable and often longer than remembered. A household's salt reserve, measured in small handfuls, determined how much meat could be cured, what could be traded, and, sometimes, who would last through the dark and bitter stretch until spring. Yet, salt was not always easy to come by. In many regions, it was tightly controlled, by lords who levied taxes, by guilds who guarded their sources, or by far-off merchants who demanded high prices. For families living close to the land, a steady supply was never guaranteed. And so, over generations, quiet strategies developed. Families would purchase or barter for salt when possible, but they would never display the full measure of their reserve. Instead, in the quietest hours, after the evening's last ember was tended and the doors firmly closed against the cold, a household head might kneel by the hearth and lift a loose stone. Beneath, wrapped in cloth or tucked into a small ceramic pot, lay the salt, dry, pale, and in its way, as precious as any silver coin. The act itself was hushed, a kind of ritual. A soft brush of dust from the stone, the careful lifting and just as careful replacement. In some homes, children were never told the true extent of their family stores, lest careless words bring unwanted attention. Neighbors, too, were treated with polite reserve. Everyone understood that such things were best kept private. It was not uncommon for entire villages to quietly compete for access to the best salt traders, or to trade small favors for a scoop from a neighbor's hidden pot in times of desperation. For those who traveled, peddlers, tinkers, or even the occasional monastic visitor, salt was a universal language of value. A tiny pinch offered at a table could open doors or earn goodwill. Conversely, the theft or loss of a salt cache was more than a household setback. It could echo through a family's fortunes for a season or more. Some stories linger of hard winters when a household discovered, too late, that their cache had been stolen or ruined by damp. In such times, survival meant relying on the thin charity of neighbors or desperate bargains at the village market. Archaeologists, sifting through old hearths and ruined cottages, sometimes find these caches centuries later. The salt itself may be long gone, drawn away by time and water, but telltale signs, scraps of pottery, a layer of fine, white residue, the unusual arrangement of stones, hint at the secret lives once lived in ordinary homes. These discoveries are quiet reminders that history is not only shaped by great events, but by the silent struggles of daily existence, the small, careful choices that define survival for people whose names are long forgotten. Even among the wealthier classes, salt carried a kind of weight. Nobles might have great stores, but they too understood its symbolism. To share salt at a feast was a mark of trust and alliance, and to withhold it was a subtle slight. Across Europe, salt taxes built fortunes and stirred unrest. In France, the hated gabelle, a royal salt tax, was a spark for anger and, centuries later, a whisper in the origins of revolution. In England, the salterns, shallow pans along the coast, became sites of quiet industry and, sometimes, petty crime. Everywhere, salt drew lines between those who had enough and those who feared the day their last grains would vanish. But for most, the memory of salt is a domestic one, the rhythm of life shaped around small acts of preservation, resourcefulness, and secrecy. In the deepening quiet of a winter's night, imagine a mother or father lifting the hearthstone, touching the cool surface of the hidden pot, measuring out just enough to last until the thaw. The fire's glow flickers across stone and bone and hope. In that moment, the kitchen is filled not only with the scent of wood smoke and earth, but with the silent determination that marked so many lives. It is in these almost invisible moments that the true story of survival is written. So as you drift through these gentle images of distant kitchens and ancient routines, consider how much depended on the hidden caches beneath hearthstones, how much of history's rhythm was measured out, grain by grain, in the quiet dark. The discreet exchanges of foraged herbs in twilight shadows. Imagine yourself walking the narrow, rutted lanes of a medieval village as the sun sinks low, casting a pale gold across wattle and daub cottages. There is a hush that settles with twilight, the end of a day's hard work gently giving way to the quiet rhythm of evening routines. The village itself is winding down, doors are latched, small fires are tended, and the scent of wood smoke curls lazily into the air. Amid these shadows, subtle movements begin. A handful of women, their faces softened by lamplight and the glow of the setting sun, drift toward the edge of a small common, the skirts of their woolen dresses whispering across the grass. You might not notice them at first. There is nothing dramatic in their gait, only a kind of practiced caution born from years of living with watchful neighbors and unspoken rules. They gather in small, shifting knots, choosing corners where the stone walls of a stable or the overhang of a thatched roof hide them from easy view. In their hands are small bundles, wrapped in faded scraps of linen or tucked into woven baskets. These are not treasures in the way gold or coin might be. Yet for these women, and for those who depend on them, the contents are more precious than any wealth. Inside the bundles are herbs, wild marjoram, dried yarrow, the feathery green of fennel, perhaps a clutch of plantain leaves or sprigs of sweet woodruff. These are not idle collections, but the product of quiet foraging throughout the day. The woods beyond the fields, the riverbanks, even the muddy borders of the village path, all have yielded their gifts. Some of the women learned to spot the lacy outline of meadowsweet from their mothers. Others have discovered for themselves the sharp, peppery taste of wild cress. Each plant is chosen with purpose and often with memory, a remedy passed down, an answer to an illness once endured. In the hush of twilight, the exchanges begin. There are few words, just low voices, barely rising above the sounds of distant livestock or the steady croak of evening frogs. A woman with a sick child at home might trade a bundle of mint for a handful of dried elderflower. Another, with hands red and sore from the wash, accepts a small measure of comfrey root, wrapped in a twist of cloth. Advice is shared as softly as the herbs themselves. Steep this leaf in hot water, crush these seeds for a poultice, boil this root until the water runs golden. Some of the knowledge is little more than hopeful tradition, a comfort in the face of uncertainty. Yet many of the remedies truly ease fever, calm a cough, or quiet aching joints, simple acts of care that ripple quietly through families. This is not a marketplace. There is no barter in the loud, public sense. Instead, what emerges is an unspoken network, woven together by necessity, trust, and the slow accumulation of knowledge. The herbs change hands, but so too do stories. Accounts of who is ill, who is expecting a child, whose husband returned from the fields limping. The network extends into the fabric of village life, nearly invisible to those who are not looking for it. But its impact is profound, especially in a world where formal medical care is distant or, for many, inaccessible. Imagine the world of these women for a moment. Illness and injury are constant possibilities. A cough in the wrong season, a cut that festers, a fever that will not break. There are no pharmacies, no doctors who make regular rounds. Instead, the health of a family often rests on what can be gathered, prepared, and quietly traded. Some remedies are the stuff of folklore, plants with names that promise protection, like self-heal or heal-all. Others are grounded in observation, their effectiveness proven over countless quiet recoveries. The exchange of herbs is not only a practical act, but also a gesture of solidarity. Each trade acknowledges the vulnerability and resourcefulness of those involved. For many women, this was one of the few forms of autonomy and expertise available to them. To know the ways of plants, to recognize the shift of seasons and the secrets of the hedgerow, was to hold a kind of gentle power, a means to nurture, to comfort, and sometimes, to save. Yet discretion remains necessary. In some eras and regions, the practice of herbalism falls under suspicion. Authorities, whether clerical or civic, may view it with skepticism or fear, wary of anything that strays from sanctioned knowledge. Accusations of witchcraft, though rare and often exaggerated in popular retellings, are not unheard of. Even without outright danger, there is always the risk of social censure, of gossip, misunderstanding, or resentment from those who see secrecy where there is only caution. Thus, the twilight hour becomes a shield, shadows lend safety, and the day's end provides cover for exchange. As the women part ways, their burdens are lighter but their households stronger. The bundles they carry home may seem small, a handful of leaves, a few dried flowers, but they represent something greater. They are proof of community, of a willingness to share risk and knowledge in a world shaped by uncertainty. Night deepens. The cottages glow faintly with lamplight, the hush of evening broken only by a lullaby, the crackle of fire, or the soft, rhythmic breathing of those who sleep. The traded herbs are put to use. A pot simmers gently on the hearth, steam rising fragrant with the promise of relief. In the silence, a mother's hand soothes a child's brow, a wife eases her husband's aching muscles, a daughter learns the pattern of leaves and roots. And so, while much of history records the grand events and public deeds, another kind of history unfolds quietly in these exchanges. It is written not in ink, but in the memory of those who lived, in the patterns of care that endured from season to season. The discreet exchange of foraged herbs and twilight shadows is one such story, gentle, persistent, and quietly powerful, shaping the rhythm of village life as surely as any king or battle. As you drift further into sleep, let your mind wander the paths of this ancient village, the fragrance of herbs lingering in the air, and the comforting sense that even in the deepest shadows, care and knowledge moved gently from hand to hand, unseen but essential, beneath the watchful gaze of the stars. The silent struggle to keep bees alive through famine winters. Imagine yourself waking before sunrise, the cold of a medieval winter curling beneath the doorway and creeping between the cracks in the walls. Outside, the land is blanketed in a hush, fields hard with frost, trees motionless and dark. The only sounds are the distant cough of a neighbor's cow and, every so often, the gentle crackle from a dying hearth. Life is shaped by the unrelenting struggle to carry one day into the next, especially when famine hovers at the edge of each breath. Yet, for some families, hidden beneath layers of straw in the corner of the yard, lies a source of hope as precious as grain. In the dim gray light, you might glimpse the outline of a bee skep, a woven dome of twisted straw, squat and simple, but housing a world on the brink of collapse. The bees within are not only alive, but essential, their quiet labor storing sweetness against the cold, their survival a question that shapes the fate of a household. In these years, famine presses in with a steady, invisible weight. Crops have failed, or wildflowers have withered under unseasonal frost. There is little left for the bees to forage, and less for the family who depends on them. Yet, the link between hive and hearth is intimate. Honey is more than a treat. It is a dense, golden well of calories, a source of medicine, and, when candles are made, one of the few ways to push back the darkness of a winter night. To lose a hive is to lose a dozen small comforts that together mark the difference between hardship and hope. Families respond with a vigilance that is almost ritualistic. Imagine yourself as a child, wrapped in wool, stepping softly through the frozen mud at dawn, following a parent or grandparent to the hives at the edge of the yard. Each step is checked, its sides brushed clear of snow, its woven lid gently lifted to listen for the soft hum of life within. There is a special kind of anxiety in this task, a silence held between breaths as you hope for the faintest movement, the barest sign that the colony endures. It is not just care, but secrecy, that marks this winter tending. In times of plenty, honey can be shared, perhaps even sold. But when famine closes in, every hive becomes both treasure and target. Honey may be requisitioned by the local lord, or seized to meet tithes for the church, or even eyed enviously by neighbors. To protect the bees is to protect a fragile margin of survival. Whispers pass among the family, guard the skeps, hide the honey, and trust only those who understand what is at stake. The acts of tending take on a rhythm, gentle, repetitive, almost hypnotic. At dawn and dusk, water sweetened with sugar is left on small wooden boards or in shallow clay bowls near the hives, a quiet offering when no blossom will bloom. In some households, old beliefs persist. Charms are whispered, sometimes in Latin or the faded dialects of ancestors, asking the bees to stay, to wake when warmth returns, to bless the house that shelters them. There is comfort in these rituals, a sense of shared purpose between human and insect, a partnership struck in silence and cold. Sometimes the bees do not survive. The winter can be long, and stores of honey in the combs dwindle faster than the sun returns. Loss is a private grief. A skep that falls silent is removed quietly, its emptiness a shadow among the chores. Yet, when a colony does endure, its hum is a quiet music, a promise that spring will one day return. Children who grow up in such winters remember the sound for a lifetime, the low, vibrating reassurance that life, somehow, continues beneath the crust of snow. Honey, when it is harvested, is used with a reverence born of necessity. A spoonful in thin gruel, a dab on a wound, a drop mixed with herbs for a coughing child, each use is measured and precious. Beeswax, too, is hoarded for the making of candles, for sealing wounds, or for barter in the leanest years. Sometimes, just the memory of the hive is enough to stir comfort, a sense of connection to nature's cycles, even in the depth of deprivation. In some parts of Europe, the tending of bees was also an act of quiet learning. Old texts tell of women and men who observed the hives through long winters, noting how clusters moved to keep warm, how a healthy queen could mean the difference between plenty and loss. These quiet observations were passed down, rare, precious knowledge, kept within families or shared in hushed conversation with trusted neighbors. The language of bees became a language of survival. And so, the winter passes. The rhythm of life remains slow and careful, days measured by chores, nights by the flicker of a single candle. You can picture the family sitting together, hands wrapped around mugs of thin broth, voices low. In a corner, the skeps sit beneath their layer of straw, their warmth preserved as best as possible, their survival a hope never spoken too loudly. Sometimes, the coming of spring is marked not by flowers or sun, but by the first return of the bees, a trembling at the hive's entrance, a flash of gold in the pale air. It is a moment of quiet celebration, a private triumph over hunger and cold, a reminder that the partnership between people and bees is ancient and as fragile as a wing. As the world begins to thaw and green returns to the fields, the family's struggle eases, slightly. Honey can once again be gathered, shared, and hidden. The cycle begins anew, shaped by the lessons of famine winters. Even in years of plenty, the memory lingers, the silent tending, the dawn rituals, the whispered charms, and the knowledge that survival so often depends not on grand heroics, but on small, careful acts, done in secret and remembered in silence. And as you drift from this story into your own quiet, you might let the gentle hum of the bees guide you, a subtle reminder of resilience, partnership, and the soft power of tending what must survive, even when the world outside seems lost to cold and hunger. In every age, it is these silent struggles that sustain life, shaping the unseen heart of history beneath the surface of daily things. The silent struggle to keep bees alive through famine winters. Imagine yourself waking before sunrise, the cold of a medieval winter curling beneath the doorway and creeping between the cracks in the walls. Outside, the land is blanketed in a hush, fields hard with frost, trees motionless and dark. The only sounds are the distant cough of a neighbor's cow and, every so often, the gentle crackle from a dying hearth. Life is shaped by the unrelenting struggle to carry one day into the next, especially when famine hovers at the edge of each breath. Yet, for some families, hidden beneath layers of straw in the corner of the yard, lies a source of hope as precious as grain. In the dim gray light, you might glimpse the outline of a bee skep, a woven dome of twisted straw, squat and simple, but housing a world on the brink of collapse. The bees within are not only alive, but essential, their quiet labor storing sweetness against the cold, their survival a question that shapes the fate of a household. In these years, famine presses in with a steady, invisible weight. Crops have failed, or wildflowers have withered under unseasonal frost. There is little left for the bees to forage, and less for the family who depends on them. Yet, the link between hive and hearth is intimate. Honey is more than a treat. It is a dense, golden well of calories, a source of medicine, and, when candles are made, one of the few ways to push back the darkness of a winter night. To lose a hive is to lose a dozen small comforts that together mark the difference between hardship and hope. Families respond with a vigilance that is almost ritualistic. Imagine yourself as a child, wrapped in wool, stepping softly through the frozen mud at dawn, following a parent or grandparent to the hives at the edge of the yard. Each skep is checked, its sides brushed clear of snow, its woven lid gently lifted to listen for the soft hum of life within. There is a special kind of anxiety in this task, a silence held between breaths as you hope for the faintest movement, the barest sign that the colony endures. It is not just care, but secrecy, that marks this winter tending. In times of plenty, honey can be shared, perhaps even sold. But when famine closes in, every hive becomes both treasure and target. Honey may be requisitioned by the local lord, or seized to meet tithes for the church, or even eyed enviously by neighbors. To protect the bees is to protect a fragile margin of survival. Whispers pass among the family, guard the skeps, hide the honey, and trust only those who understand what is at stake. The acts of tending take on a rhythm, gentle, repetitive, almost hypnotic. At dawn and dusk, water sweetened with sugar is left on small wooden boards or in shallow clay bowls near the hives, a quiet offering when no blossom will bloom. In some households, old beliefs persist. Charms are whispered, sometimes in Latin or the faded dialects of ancestors, asking the bees to stay, to wake when warmth returns, to bless the house that shelters them. There is comfort in these rituals, a sense of shared purpose between human and insect, a partnership struck in silence and cold. Sometimes the bees do not survive. The winter can be long, and stores of honey in the combs dwindle faster than the sun returns. Loss is a private grief. A skep that falls silent is removed quietly, its emptiness a shadow among the chores. Yet, when a colony does endure, its hum is a quiet music, a promise that spring will one day return. Children who grow up in such winters remember the sound for a lifetime, the low, vibrating reassurance that life, somehow, continues beneath the crust of snow. Honey, when it is harvested, is used with a reverence born of necessity. A spoonful in thin gruel, a dab on a wound, a drop mixed with herbs for a coughing child, each use is measured and precious. Beeswax, too, is hoarded for the making of candles, for sealing wounds, or for barter in the leanest years. Sometimes, just the memory of the hive is enough to stir comfort, a sense of connection to nature's cycles, even in the depth of deprivation. In some parts of Europe, the tending of bees was also an act of quiet learning. Old texts tell of women and men who observed the hives through long winters, noting how clusters moved to keep warm, how a healthy queen could mean the difference between plenty and loss. These quiet observations were passed down, rare, precious knowledge, kept within families or shared in hushed conversation with trusted neighbors. The language of bees became a language of survival. And so, the winter passes. The rhythm of life remains slow and careful, days measured by chores, nights by the flicker of a single candle. You can picture the family sitting together, hands wrapped around mugs of thin broth, voices low. In a corner, the Scribes sit beneath their layer of straw, their warmth preserved as best as possible, their survival a hope never spoken too loudly. Sometimes, the coming of spring is marked not by flowers or sun, but by the first return of the bees, a trembling at the hive's entrance, a flash of gold in the pale air. It is a moment of quiet celebration, a private triumph over hunger and cold, a reminder that the partnership between people and bees is ancient and as fragile as a wing. As the world begins to thaw and green returns to the fields, the family's struggle eases, slightly. Honey can once again be gathered, shared, and hidden. The cycle begins anew, shaped by the lessons of famine winters. Even in years of plenty, the memory lingers, the silent tending, the dawn rituals, the whispered charms, and the knowledge that survival so often depends not on grand heroics, but on small, careful acts, done in secret and remembered in silence. And as you drift from this story into your own quiet, you might let the gentle hum of the bees guide you, a subtle reminder of resilience, partnership, and the soft power of tending what must survive, even when the world outside seems lost to cold and hunger. In every age, it is these silent struggles that sustain life, shaping the unseen heart of history beneath the surface of daily things. The sealed letters of grain debts hidden in family Bibles. Imagine yourself seated at a small wooden table, the evening quiet except for the soft crackle of a low fire and the ticking of a distant clock. The day's work is finished, and the shadows deepen in every corner of the room. On the tabletop rests a well-worn family Bible, its binding gently faded, its pages thick and uneven from the touch of many hands over many years. The book is more than a vessel for scripture. It is the silent guardian of a family's memory and, sometimes, its quiet secrets. In times when harvests failed or grain stores ran low, survival in rural communities often hinged on neighborly trust, discreet arrangements, and the careful balancing of favors. To borrow a sack of grain was not merely a transaction. It was a gesture of hope, a pledge of mutual endurance in the face of scarcity. Yet, such agreements rarely found their way into the public ledgers or parish records. Instead, they took the form of simple, handwritten notes, carefully folded, quietly exchanged, and almost always kept hidden from official eyes. You can picture the ritual, a scrap of parchment or the torn corner of a letter, a few lines penned in a practiced, modest hand. 2 measures of barley lent, to be returned at harvest's end, or 1 bushel of rye, by God's grace repaid come Michaelmas. Names are signed, sometimes with a trembling mark for those who cannot write, and the date is added in the margin. The note is slipped into an envelope or sealed with a simple twist of thread. It is not the legalistic language of courts, but the everyday contract of trust between families who share the same fields, the same risks, the same lean winters. Where to hide such a letter? Not in a purse that might be searched or a drawer that children might rummage through. Instead, the safest place is often the most respected object in the home, the family Bible. Between Psalms and Proverbs, tucked beneath a birth record or pressed flat against a faded funeral card, the letter finds sanctuary. It is an act of faith on more than one level. Faith that the debt will be honored, faith that privacy will be preserved, faith that the family will weather another season of hardship. Imagine the feel of the old paper, its edges soft and slightly curled. Some notes might be decades old, others fresh from a neighbor's kitchen. Over time, the Bible's pages thicken, swelling gently with the weight of folded secrets. Children might glimpse these slips in passing, too young to read, wondering at their purpose. Older family members might recognize them with a quiet nod, a reminder that their own childhood hunger, or that of a cousin or friend, was soothed not only by prayer, but by the quiet generosity and trust of others. In harsh years, when weather ruined crops or sickness swept through the countryside, these private contracts became lifelines. A family with a good harvest might share what they could, keeping careful account but never boasting. Repayment, when it came, was cause for quiet celebration. A sack returned, a loaf of bread left at the door, a whispered word of thanks on Sunday morning. And if fate was unkind and repayment proved impossible, often the note remained sealed and silent, an old promise quietly forgiven as fortunes changed. Such acts rarely drew the attention of local officials or tax collectors. Public records might track landholdings or tithes, but the intricate web of grain debts, the true map of survival, remained hidden, safely out of sight. The Bible, always respected, rarely questioned, protected both lender and borrower alike. Only in moments of true crisis, a death in the family, or a sudden move to distant lands, might these notes be discovered, their stories pieced together by those left behind. Archaeologists and historians sometimes find evidence of these private debts not in grand archives, but in the smallest traces, a sealed envelope pressed between pages of an old book, a faded receipt tucked among family papers. The writing is personal, often informal, revealing a world of practical morality where written promises and spoken trust were tightly interwoven. It was a culture where reputation mattered, and the memory of a debt could outlive the passing of silver coins or the counting of grain. Among the wealthy and the well-connected, such arrangements took on a different tone. Their records might be kept in ledgers, carefully locked away, or negotiated with more elaborate language. Yet even the grandest estate, the largest barn, was not immune to the uncertainty of the harvest. Across social boundaries, the exchange of grain and the careful keeping of debts revealed the universal anxiety beneath the surface of agricultural life. For most families, the act of borrowing or lending was a moment of vulnerability, an admission that survival sometimes depended on the kindness and patience of others. Hiding the contract in a Bible lent dignity and privacy to this dependence, transforming what could be shameful into something quietly sacred. As you picture the scene, a family gathered at the table, the Bible open, the hush of evening deepening, you can sense the rhythm of their lives, marked by the gentle folding of paper, the muted hope of a promise, and the steadfast trust that tomorrow's harvest might bring abundance enough for all. The sealed letters rest where scripture and memory meet, carrying forward the story of survival, one quiet agreement at a time. And as the fire fades and the house grows silent, the Bible closes gently over its hidden cargo, guarding not only words of faith, but the fragile bonds of community that allowed so many to endure. In the calm of night, these letters sleep, waiting to be honored, forgiven, or simply remembered, long after their debts have faded into the hush of history. The unspoken bargains with forest poachers in the dead of night. Imagine yourself in a small English village, somewhere on the edge of an ancient forest. The sun has long dipped below the horizon, and the world outside is hushed except for the distant call of an owl and the soft, persistent rustle of leaves. Houses, their walls thick with centuries of memory, seem to lean in closer to one another after dark, as if sharing their own quiet secrets. Most families have shuttered their doors and stoked their fires, but a subtle sense of anticipation lingers in the night air, a knowledge that, before dawn, someone will knock softly at a kitchen window. In the Middle Ages and well into the centuries that followed, the forests of Europe were more than wild spaces. They were carefully guarded assets of kings, nobles, and landowners. Laws about hunting were strict and, to the commoner, seemingly arbitrary. The deer, boar, or even the humble rabbit belonged not to those who needed them most, but to those who held title and privilege. And yet, the reality of daily life rarely respected the lines drawn on parchment or the proclamations posted at a manor gate. When winter pressed in or harvests failed, the rules that protected game seemed to fade into the mist, replaced by an older logic, one of necessity and silent understanding. The poacher was a familiar figure in village life, though rarely spoken of openly. Often, he was not an outsider, but a neighbor, a cousin, or a friend who understood both the danger and the quiet opportunities hidden beneath the canopy of the forest. By day, he might tend a plot of land, repair a thatched roof, or join in the common work of the village. But when the sky deepened and the woods fell silent, he slipped into another role, one defined by skill, patience, and the risk of capture. To poach was to walk a delicate line. The penalties, if caught, could be severe: fines, public humiliation, even imprisonment or forced labor. Yet the rewards, measured in the warm, fragrant meat of a rabbit stew or a rare haunch of venison, were sometimes worth the risk. The villagers understood this trade-off. Officially, they could neither condone nor acknowledge the practice. Unofficially, many looked the other way, or, on certain nights, found ways to quietly benefit from it. This is where the unspoken bargains began, in kitchens dimly lit by tallow candles, where hunger pressed in and the promise of something more than stale bread or thin porridge was difficult to resist. The poacher would not announce himself. Instead, he might leave a subtle sign: a feather on a doorstep, a smooth stone in a certain spot, a quiet rap on the shutters well after curfew. Those who recognized the signals would respond just as discreetly. A loaf of coarse bread left on the windowsill, a mug of strong ale by the barn, a bundle of old cloth for wrapping a prize. In return, a small parcel might appear by morning. Wrapped in linen, hidden in the straw, or tucked behind a stone, the gift was unmistakable: the weight and shape of fresh game. There were rarely words exchanged. The silence was part of the bargain, as essential as the bread or the meat itself. Everyone understood the necessity of caution, for suspicion could lead to questioning, and questioning might bring the Lord's men or even the village reeve to their door. Still, these quiet trades became woven into the fabric of village life, a secret rhythm known to all but spoken by none. Sometimes the bargains went beyond mere food. In lean years, poachers might accept a favor in exchange for their risks: a patch on a torn coat, help mending a fence, or a few strips of linen for dressing wounds sustained in the forest. It was a web of mutual support, built less on trust than on shared need and a tacit code: do not ask, do not tell, do not betray. For every villager who accepted a poacher's goods, there was a quiet recognition that the arrangement could not last forever. The danger was always present. Patrols through the woods, sudden searches, informants rewarded for a whispered word. All these things hovered at the edge of every transaction. Yet, for most, the risk was preferable to the alternative. Without these unspoken bargains, many would have faced empty bowls or gnawed the ends of hard crusts for weeks. The meat brought warmth and strength. The knowledge that others, too, participated in these exchanges, however discreetly, lent a sense of solidarity, an invisible alliance against the harsher realities of law and hunger. Over time, such customs left only faint traces in the historical record. Occasionally, court rolls mention the punishment of a known poacher, or a lord's complaint about dwindling game. More often, though, the evidence appears in the quiet statistics of survival: a village that endures a harsh winter, a family that manages to keep its children fed, a sudden appearance of venison in the stew on a feast day. These are the marks of the unrecorded bargains, fleeting, practical, and essential. Imagine, then, the slow rhythm of nights in a village by the forest, the soft exchange of bread for meat, the gentle hope that one more meal might make the difference. These stories, never written down, echo quietly through the ages, a reminder that history is built not only on grand events, but on the countless, gentle acts of resilience and silent cooperation. So, as you drift into sleep, let your mind wander through these hidden lanes and silent kitchens. Picture the careful handoff, the secret gratitude, the way necessity can bind people together in the dark, never quite spoken, but always understood. The low murmurs of prayer over cracked walls and hungry silence. Imagine yourself in a small, dimly lit room, thick stone walls rising up around you, their surfaces rough, patched, and cracked from years of winter cold and damp spring thaw. The flicker of a tallow candle struggles against the shadows, and the air, heavy with the scent of wood smoke and old straw, sits still. In this quiet, just before the first hint of morning, a family sits close together on worn benches or on a simple rush mat laid across the hard-packed floor. Hands are clasped, heads are bowed, and voices, low and hushed, move together in prayer. Outside, the world is at its coldest. The wind presses at every weak place in the wall, seeking entry. Sometimes it succeeds, finding a narrow crack or a space where stone has shifted, slipping inside to draw shivers from even the thickest woolen tunic. In these moments, silence and coldness settle over the household like a second blanket. In the far corner, a thin child pulls their knees to their chest. A mother draws her shawl tighter, careful to keep her child within the circle of her arms. A father, calloused hands resting on the wooden table, stares into the dimness, feeling the ache in his joints, the weight of another uncertain season. It is in this setting that prayer takes on a new character, something more than ritual, yet also less than spectacle. There is no audience, no grand altar, no golden chalice to catch the eye. Instead, the sacred slips quietly into the spaces between breath and silence. The murmurs that rise are soft, barely louder than the wind that curls around the eaves. They are shaped by need, but also by endurance. Hunger tightens the belly, yet the voice persists, a thread connecting hope and despair. Imagine the rhythm of these lives. The days are filled with work, tending livestock, repairing thatch, scraping together what little can be found for the pot. But in the coldest months, when larders shrink and the memory of autumn's plenty fades, the long nights stretch and hunger becomes a familiar companion. The walls, meant to shelter, to protect, show their limits. Each crack is a reminder of fragility, each gust a whispered warning that survival is never certain. And so, the family draws together, not only for warmth but for comfort, a comfort found as much in ritual as in touch. Prayer in these hours is both surrender and protest. It is the voice of those who know they cannot command the sun to rise or the earth to yield its grain, but who refuse to give in entirely to despair. The words, simple, unadorned, often repeated night after night, ask for mercy, for strength, for the safety of children and the return of spring. Sometimes they ask only for endurance. The repetition itself is soothing, like a lullaby, a way of making sense of the darkness when there are no answers to be found. The cracked walls bear silent witness to these rituals. If you look closely, you might see places where old plaster has fallen away, revealing the bones of the house. Rough stones, patches of straw and mud, the work of many hands over many years. Each imperfection is the result of hardship, windstorms that battered the village, a fire long ago, a winter so severe that no mortar could hold. Yet the walls still stand, sheltering those within. There is a stubbornness here, a kind of quiet pride, in making do with what remains. As you listen to the low murmurs of prayer, you might notice the ways in which these voices blend, one person leading, others following, or perhaps all speaking together, words flowing and overlapping until individual hopes become a collective plea. Sometimes, there is a pause, an intake of breath, a glance at the ceiling as if the answers might drift down with the dust motes. Then the prayer resumes, soft and insistent. These moments are not unique to one family or one time. Across centuries and continents, the scene repeats itself. People gathered in the hush before dawn, united in their need and their longing. The content of the prayers may change, the names of saints, the wording of petitions, the traditions woven into the night, but the act remains much the same. It is a ritual shaped by necessity and by the human capacity for hope. Hunger, too, is an old companion. In some years, the grain stores run low. In others, blight or bad weather brings scarcity sooner than expected. Meals become simpler. A crust of bread, a thin broth, whatever roots or wild greens can be found. The children ask for more, but learn not to expect it. The adults worry in silence, turning over memories of harder winters, quieter losses. Yet, even as hunger gnaws, the daily patterns persist. Chores are done, small kindnesses exchanged, a neighbor's troubles quietly absorbed into one's own. The act of praying over the walls, over the very structure meant to keep out the world's troubles, becomes a way of reaffirming belonging and endurance. The walls may crack, the wind may slip through, but so too does the warmth of togetherness. As the prayer ends, there is a shared silence. Not emptiness, but a space in which comfort settles. A hand squeezed gently, a child pulled close, the promise that even in hunger, no one endures alone. Sometimes, the family adds their own traditions. A sprig of dried herbs tucked above a lintel, believed to ward off evil, a bit of last autumn's grain pressed into a crevice, a sign of hope for the next harvest. Small gestures, almost invisible but meaningful. Over time, these customs blend with the prayers, becoming part of the tapestry of memory, stories told quietly on nights when the wind howls and the world feels uncertain. As dawn approaches, the candle sputters lower. The prayers have ended, replaced by the quiet, steady breathing of those who have drifted into uneasy sleep. Outside, the world is unchanged, still cold, still uncertain. But inside, the ritual lingers, offering a thin but real line of comfort that stretches from one day to the next. If you find yourself awake in such an hour, let your thoughts wander to those who came before, who survived not with certainty, but with persistence and hope, their quiet words weaving together the fragile shelter of home, even as the world pressed in from every side. In their low murmurs, hear the echo of endurance and the gentle rhythm of hope that persists quietly into the light of a new day. The secret paths across fields to avoid lordly eyes and tithes. Imagine yourself waking in a world before sunrise, in a village where the boundaries of land and law are as much a part of daily life as bread and sleep. The air is thick with mist, dew clinging to rough grass, and every sound, an owl's call, the distant creak of a cart axle, is wrapped in quiet. Across the open fields and tangled hedgerows, a network of paths winds, some barely wider than a hare's track, almost invisible unless you know where to look. These are the secret arteries of survival, woven patiently by the passage of countless cautious feet. For most, the great roads are to be avoided, lined as they are with the ever-watchful eyes of the manor's reeve or the passing patrol of the Lord's men. Instead, the real lifeblood of the village flows along footpaths hidden by bramble and blackthorn, slipping behind thickets of hazel, threading along the edge of shadowy woods. Here, the ground is soft, pressed with prints so faint that even a practiced eye might overlook them. To walk these secret routes is to join a tradition as old as the fields themselves, a quiet, cautious dance, performed in silence and memory. Survival in these times is often a matter of outmaneuvering not just hunger and cold, but the burdens imposed by those who own the land. The Lord's tithe, his portion of grain, wood, or eggs, is collected with regularity, and to fall short is to risk fine or punishment. The eyes of the manor seem everywhere. A glint from a distant window, a question from a neighbor who may or may not be a friend. Yet, necessity breeds ingenuity. Imagine yourself, a sack of grain heavy on your back, listening for the crack of a twig or the rustle of a bird, slipping through a gap in the hedge where the dew wets your shoes and the scent of wild mint lingers in the air. These paths do not appear on any map, nor are they spoken of openly, even among friends. Instead, they are taught by example, from parent to child, in small acts, a glance, a hand on the shoulder, a wordless turn at the fork in the lane. Over time, you learn which nettles to brush aside, where the ground dips beneath an ancient oak, when to step quickly and when to pause, letting the world hold its breath around you. In the stillness, every sense is heightened. The scrape of a branch against wool, the distant barking of a dog, the crunch of frost underfoot, all these become signals. You know that if you move at just the right hour, when the mist is thickest and the manor's windows dark, you can cross the fields unseen, carrying your share of firewood, or a clutch of eggs, or a handful of sweet, forbidden apples. There is comfort in the repetition of this journey, the familiar pressure of the path under your boots, the way the hedgerow closes behind you, erasing your passing. Sometimes, the hidden routes cross the land of another, and here, a different kind of negotiation begins, a quiet agreement sealed with a nod, or a loaf of bread shared on a winter evening. The boundaries between families are respected, but flexible in the face of need. In hard years, these paths become lifelines, linking households in networks of mutual aid. You might carry news as well as goods, a warning that the steward is searching the upper field, or that a neighbor's son has returned from the wars. In this way, the secret paths are not just physical tracks, but lines of trust and connection, holding the village together when the world outside seems uncertain or hostile. There is a gentle tension in every journey, a sense of being watched, even when alone. Perhaps the magpies notice you, or the fox whose den lies near the old stone boundary marker. Perhaps, too, the land itself is aware of your passing, holding the memory of each footfall in the pressed earth and broken stems. Over years, the route becomes clearer, not by design but by the simple persistence of those who must travel it, their need carving a silent map in the landscape. Yet these paths are always at risk. Sometimes, a new steward will arrive, more vigilant than the last, sending men to patrol the fields or hiring informers to report suspicious activity. The threat of discovery is real, a penalty, a fine, a public shaming. And so, the routes shift, hedgerows grow, and entrances are hidden anew. To master these paths is to live in the delicate balance between necessity and secrecy, always adjusting, always adapting. For children, the hidden ways are a rite of passage. They learn them slowly, their memories shaped by early morning journeys with a parent, the thrill of slipping through shadow and silence. In later years, even as fields are enclosed and boundaries marked with ever more certainty, the old paths linger in memory, a secret knowledge, passed down in stories and gestures, long after the world has changed around them. With time, some of these paths fade, overgrown and forgotten, as needs shift and customs change. But even centuries later, a careful walker might stumble on the ghost of a trail, a line where the grass grows thinner, or where the hedge opens in a way that feels too deliberate to be chance. Archaeologists, when they discover these traces, find more than just earth and roots. They uncover the memory of lives shaped by quiet resistance, the rhythm of footsteps laid down by people who found ways to endure without being seen. So as you let this story settle, imagine yourself moving gently through the mist, each step a part of the silent web that once held a village together. The world above may be shaped by power and decree, but beneath, between the roots and under the hush of hedges, the quiet skill of survival endures, an unspoken map, drawn in the soft earth, and remembered by those who walked it, just out of sight. Let your thoughts drift with them, along paths both hidden and enduring, as sleep begins to soften the boundaries of your own world. The cautious drying of nettles in attics for hunger soups, imagine yourself in a modest village, perhaps in the far north or the green hills of Western Europe, sometime in the early spring, long before modern abundance was known. The last stores of grain have dwindled, and the promise of a new harvest remains distant on the calendar. Beneath low, thatched roofs, families mark time with the rhythm of scarcity, a familiar cycle that recurs more years than anyone would wish to remember. You are standing in a small kitchen, thick with the scent of wood smoke and the faint earthiness that comes from months of closed windows. The shelves are sparse. The familiar sacks of barley, oats, or rye have been carefully rationed, each handful weighed with care. Soon even those will be gone. Out beyond the village, the landscape is waking up, but it will be weeks before the first shoots of spring wheat or the broad heads of cabbages appear. It is during these lean days that quiet acts of resourcefulness unfold, mostly unnoticed by those who have a little more. Women, often the silent keepers of the family table, begin a careful search along the hedgerows and forest edges. There, amongst the tangle of new green, grow the nettles, plants that sting at the touch, but which, handled with patience and skill, can become food when other options fail. Nettles are abundant and hardy, among the first to push through the thawing earth, their deep green leaves a muted signal of hope and necessity. Returning home with baskets lined in cloth, the women work quickly, pricking fingers wrapped in cloth or protected by rough gloves. The nettles are washed and carefully hung in the highest parts of the house, the attic, the rafters above the hearth, sometimes even a small, hidden alcove beneath the roof's slope. The reason is not just for warmth or convenience. The act is as much about dignity as survival. To dry nettles in plain view is, in these times, a silent admission of want. It is a sign understood by every neighbor, a sign that hunger has reached this door. So, the drying is done with caution. Perhaps only after dark, or in the quiet hours of afternoon when the village lanes are empty, the bundles are lifted up and tied, their green leaves rustling softly against old beams. As days pass, the sharp tang of nettle drifts through the attic, blending with the dry smell of straw, the faint trace of past harvests stored and long since eaten. The rhythm of their lives has shifted, each step is measured, every glance at the larder a quiet calculation. Nettle soup is a food of necessity, not celebration. Still, the preparation of it becomes a ritual of its own. Dried nettles are crumbled carefully by hand, the leaves flaking into a battered pot along with whatever else can be spared, a little salt, if any remains, perhaps a few turnips or wild onions dug from the garden. The scent as the soup simmers is gentle, green, almost grassy, filling the kitchen with a comfort that is as much memory as flavor. Children learn to accept the taste, even if they never truly come to love it. For some, it is the flavor of survival. And yet, despite the hardship, there is pride woven through the silence. The women who gather and dry nettles do so not just for their families, but for the preservation of dignity itself. No one wants to be seen as desperate, as the household that could not provide, so these quiet acts become shields. Bundles are hidden beneath old blankets, or disguised among herbs, so that even if someone does climb to the attic, they may not notice the leaves that signal scarcity. Outside, the village continues in its own rhythm. The better-off families may still have bread, or cheese, or salted meat left in their cellars. But even they cast furtive glances at their neighbors' chimneys, wondering how much longer the winter will last, how many more weeks before green returns to the fields. Hunger is never far away, and so each household defends its dignity in the way it can, some with silence, some with small acts of generosity, some with the careful concealment of necessity. Sometimes, there is comfort in repetition. Year after year, the same bundles are tied, the same leaves gathered, the same soup simmered over low flames. The children who once frowned at the bitter taste grow up, and in time, they teach their own how to gather, how to dry, how to endure without complaint. The rhythm of their lives, marked by hunger and hope, is a quiet, unbroken thread. Historians rarely write of nettle soup, or of the small acts that fill the space between feasts and famine. The grand narratives focus on kings, wars, the changing of laws, but not on the slow, gentle art of survival practiced in attics and kitchens across the centuries. Yet it is here, in the careful drying of leaves, in the effort to keep want hidden from neighbors, that the truest story of endurance is told. When you picture it now, imagine the hush of the attic, the play of shadow among the beams, the delicate rustle as a hand brushes past a row of drying nettles. The air is cool, scented with green, as outside the world waits for spring. There is a strange comfort in knowing that these quiet acts, humble, practical, unseen, have carried countless families through lean years. The rhythm of their lives, their dignity quietly defended, endures. So as you drift, let your thoughts settle among the rafters and the green scent of nettles, where scarcity and pride are balanced in silence, and hope is measured not in abundance, but in the careful, cautious acts of everyday survival. The quiet disputes settled without witness in low stone rooms. Imagine a village wrapped in twilight, its winding lanes and weathered stone cottages growing soft at the edges as the day drifts toward night. Inside these homes, beyond the reach of prying eyes and distant from the formal world of courts or officials, a different kind of justice unfolds. The low stone rooms, half hidden below ground, cool in summer and snug in winter, become the quiet heart of community negotiation, a space where words matter more than spectacle, and survival depends on the ability to compromise. Here, the rhythm of daily life is set not just by the work of the fields or the tolling of the village bell, but by the subtle pulse of old disagreements and new resentments. Land is precious, boundaries uncertain, and tools are often shared, borrowed, or inherited in tangled ways. The ownership of a scythe, the exact line of a hedgerow, or the right to use a stretch of stream for watering animals, any of these could become a source of simmering tension. Yet, in a world where open conflict risks more than hurt pride, and where the watchful presence of outsiders can breed suspicion or escalate matters, villagers often choose another path. Picture a scene: two families, once friends or perhaps long-standing rivals, gather by lamplight in a cramped stone room beneath the oldest house on the lane. The air is thick with the scent of earth and old timber, the walls cool to the touch. A table stands between them, scarred by years of use, its surface bearing the faint marks of hurried meals and long, patient negotiations. Children are sent away or kept quiet in the shadows, their curiosity piqued by the rare hush of adult voices speaking low. The dispute is real, but so too is the knowledge that tomorrow, both parties will meet again in the fields, at the church, or by the common well. There is rarely a winner in these rooms, only the hope of a peace sturdy enough to withstand another season. Voices rarely rise above a murmur. Words are chosen carefully, apologies offered in slow, measured tones, often accompanied by the subtle ritual of bread or ale passed from hand to hand. The act of sharing food or drink is not mere hospitality, but a symbol, a way to remind all present that, beyond this disagreement, there remains a shared life, a history too intertwined to unravel. Without witnesses, there are no records, no signatures, no seals. Agreements are spoken, sometimes marked by a simple handshake, a nod, or the passing of a small token. The memory of the pact, its details, its subtle concessions, becomes a living thing, carried quietly in the minds of those present. Occasionally, a third party, respected for their wisdom or neutrality, is invited to listen or suggest a compromise. But even then, their role is to guide, not judge, to help craft an arrangement that all can live with, if not celebrate. These low stone rooms hear stories that will never reach the ears of a scribe or judge. Sometimes, the pact is uneasy, a fragile truce held together by necessity and the constant pressure of daily life. If old wounds reopen or a new quarrel emerges, the same parties may return, retracing their steps through the dim corridors of the house, voices softer, patience thinner, but still determined to avoid the cost and shame of public dispute. For outsiders, the village may seem orderly, even peaceful, its customs and relationships fixed by time and tradition. But beneath the surface, it is this web of private negotiation that allows it to endure. Disputes are not banished. They are managed, transformed from open conflict into whispered dialogue. In this way, communities knit themselves together, not with laws and penalties, but with the slow, careful weaving of promises and forgiveness. Among the elite, with their grand halls and written contracts, disputes are more formal, their resolutions recorded in ledgers or witnessed by servants. Yet even in the manor, there are moments when a disagreement is best resolved behind a heavy door, out of the public eye. Here too, the wisdom of compromise sometimes outweighs the spectacle of authority. Archaeologists find few traces of these quiet settlements. A scratched mark on a stone, a half-broken cup left behind, a faded account in a diary, all hint at agreements made and forgotten, at truces that held just long enough for memory to fade. Oral histories, passed from grandparent to child, sometimes recall the outlines of old conflicts, softened by time into stories of clever negotiation or gentle reconciliation. If you imagine yourself seated at that table, hands folded, voice calm, you can almost feel the weight of expectation in the air. The desire for peace is as real as any hunger. The fear of shame or exile presses at the edge of every word. Yet, as the lantern burns low and the last words are spoken, there is relief, quiet, sometimes temporary, but real. The stone room grows silent once more. Footsteps echo up the stairs, and families slip back into the rhythm of village life. The pact, whether strong or fragile, endures, woven into the fabric of the community, holding it together through another day, another season, another generation. The disputes, settled without witness, become invisible foundations beneath the village, as steady and unremarked as the stones themselves. The secret carving of family marks into barn beams for claim. Imagine a village landscape in the late dusk, barns rising quietly from the earth like ancient guardians. The air is heavy with the sense of hay and old wood, and beyond the hedgerows, fields settle into darkness under a sky thick with the quiet hush of generations. Here, in these humble barns and outbuildings, another kind of history was written, not in ink nor in ledgers, but by the slow and secret movement of hands in the night. Long before paperwork or legal deeds became commonplace, the lines of ownership and inheritance were rarely clear-cut. Land might pass from father to son, or be divided among brothers and cousins, or even be lost and regained through barter, dispute, or the changing favor of a local lord. In such a world, the written record was precious, but often out of reach for those who lived close to the soil. For many, the only safeguard was memory, reinforced, from time to time, by a quiet act carried out in darkness. Picture a farmer, perhaps after a long day's work, waiting until the household is at rest. The quiet is nearly total. Only the small, routine noises of livestock and the gentle shift of timbers remind him he is not alone. He steps into the barn, closing the door softly behind him. In one hand, a simple blade, worn smooth from years of use. In the other, a sliver of candle or perhaps a shuttered lantern, its flame carefully shielded. He makes his way to a familiar beam, the heartwood running straight and true. With practiced motion, he carves a symbol, a mark known only to his family, passed down with whispered meaning from one generation to the next. Sometimes it is a simple initial or a pattern of lines. Sometimes a stylized animal, a cross, or a geometric design unique to the house. These are not the grand signatures of kings or the ornate seals of the powerful, but they hold power nonetheless. In times of dispute, when a neighbor lays claim to the grain stored in a loft, or a distant cousin questions the right to an old barn, the presence of that quiet mark may be the only evidence left. A subtle form of memory, encoded in the very bones of the building, ready to be revealed when need arose. This quiet tradition, part ritual and part necessity, grew in places where written documents could be lost, destroyed, or simply ignored by those in authority. Lords might promise to honor old agreements, but the tides of fortune and favor could shift quickly. A legal document was no guarantee, especially for those without the means to enforce their rights in distant courts. In such times, a carved symbol hidden beneath rafters or behind feed bins became a shield against oblivion. Carving was typically done in the deepest dark, not out of shame but caution. For these marks were not just family pride, but protection. The fewer who knew, the safer the claim would be from forgery or tampering. Sometimes, the mark was placed in a location difficult to reach, a roof beam, a corner post, the underside of a floorboard, places that would require effort and inside knowledge to discover. Trusted sons or daughters might be shown the mark, sometimes as a rite of passage, but outsiders rarely glimpsed these quiet signatures. Occasionally, a barn changed hands through sale, marriage, or inheritance. The new owners might carve their own mark, often beside or overlapping the old one, creating a kind of layered family history. Archaeologists, centuries later, sometimes find clusters of symbols in ancient barns, silent records of shifting fortunes and the rhythms of village life. The wood bears witness, grain by grain, to disputes and reconciliations long forgotten by everyone except, perhaps, the beams themselves. For the people of the time, this practice became woven into the pattern of rural life. Stories circulated of marks that saved a family's claim when all else failed. A quarrel might break out at a market, tempers rising over the boundaries of a barn or the rightful owner of a harvest. Then, as tempers cooled and neighbors gathered, someone would propose a quiet return to the barn, a climb into the shadowy rafters, the brushing away of dust to reveal a mark left by a father or grandfather, testimony stronger than words or fading memory. The act of carving was a simple one, but not without meaning. It carried a quiet defiance, an assertion that even the humblest family could leave their trace on the land, even as the world beyond their fields shifted and changed. It was a promise, too, a hope that what was carefully protected in darkness might outlast storms, disputes, or the slow forgetting of time. As you listen now, imagine yourself tracing your hand across the smooth, time-worn timber of such a barn. The mark is faint, softened by the years but still present, a gentle reminder that history is often made not by the loud proclamations of the powerful, but by the quiet actions of ordinary people. With each night's carving, families stitch themselves into the fabric of their home, marking not only wood, but memory and belonging. In the gentle dark, the village settles into sleep. The barns stand quietly, sheltering more than animals and grain. Beneath their beams, stories linger, written in secret signs, carved for no eyes but those who would someday need them. It is in these silent, nearly invisible moments that the rhythm of inheritance is kept alive, and the past is gently carried forward, beam by beam, from one generation to the next. The secret carving of family marks into barn beams for claim. Imagine a village landscape in the late dusk, barns rising quietly from the earth like ancient guardians. The air is heavy with the scents of hay and old wood, and beyond the hedgerows, fields settle into darkness under a sky thick with the quiet hush of generations. Here, in these humble barns and outbuildings, another kind of history was written, not in ink nor in ledgers, but by the slow and secret movement of hands in the night. Long before paperwork or legal deeds became commonplace, the lines of ownership and inheritance were rarely clear-cut. Land might pass from father to son, or be divided among brothers and cousins, or even be lost and regained through barter, dispute, or the changing favor of a local lord. In such a world, the written record was precious, but often out of reach for those who lived close to the soil. For many, the only safeguard was memory, reinforced, from time to time, by a quiet act carried out in darkness. Picture a farmer, perhaps after a long day's work, waiting until the household is at rest. The quiet is nearly total, only the small, routine noises of livestock and the gentle shift of timbers remind him he is not alone. He steps into the barn, closing the door softly behind him. In one hand, a simple blade, worn smooth from years of use. In the other, a sliver of candle or perhaps a shuttered lantern, its flame carefully shielded. He makes his way to a familiar beam, the heartwood running straight and true. With practiced motion, he carves a symbol, a mark known only to his family, passed down with whispered meaning from one generation to the next. Sometimes it is a simple initial or a pattern of lines. Sometimes a stylized animal, a cross, or a geometric design unique to the house. These are not the grand signatures of kings or the ornate seals of the powerful, but they hold power nonetheless. In times of dispute, when a neighbor lays claim to the grain stored in a loft, or a distant cousin questions the right to an old barn, the presence of that quiet mark may be the only evidence left. A subtle form of memory, encoded in the very bones of the building, ready to be revealed when need arose. This quiet tradition, part ritual and part necessity, grew in places where written documents could be lost, destroyed, or simply ignored by those in authority. Lords might promise to honor old agreements, but the tides of fortune and favor could shift quickly. A legal document was no guarantee, especially for those without the means to enforce their rights in distant courts. In such times, a carved symbol hidden beneath rafters or behind feed bins became a shield against oblivion. Carving was typically done in the deepest dark, not out of shame but caution. For these marks were not just family pride, but protection. The fewer who knew, the safer the claim would be from forgery or tampering. Sometimes, the mark was placed in a location difficult to reach, a roof beam, a corner post, the underside of a floorboard, places that would require effort and inside knowledge to discover. Trusted sons or daughters might be shown the mark, sometimes as a rite of passage, but outsiders rarely glimpsed these quiet signatures. Occasionally, a barn changed hands through sale, marriage, or inheritance. The new owners might carve their own mark, often beside or overlapping the old one, creating a kind of layered family history. Archaeologists, centuries later, sometimes find clusters of symbols in ancient barns, silent records of shifting fortunes and the rhythms of village life. The wood bears witness, grain by grain, to disputes and reconciliations long forgotten by everyone except, perhaps, the beams themselves. For the people of the time, this practice became woven into the pattern of rural life. Stories circulated of marks that saved a family's claim when all else failed. A quarrel might break out at a market, tempers rising over the boundaries of a barn or the rightful owner of a harvest. Then, as tempers cooled and neighbors gathered, someone would propose a quiet return to the barn, a climb into the shadowy rafters, the brushing away of dust to reveal a mark left by a father or grandfather, testimony stronger than words or fading memory. The act of carving was a simple one, but not without meaning. It carried a quiet defiance, an assertion that even the humblest family could leave their trace on the land, even as the world beyond their fields shifted and changed. It was a promise, too, a hope that what was carefully protected in darkness might outlast storms, disputes, or the slow forgetting of time. As you listen now, imagine yourself tracing your hand across the smooth, time-worn timber of such a barn. The mark is faint, softened by the years but still present, a gentle reminder that history is often made not by the loud proclamations of the powerful, but by the quiet actions of ordinary people. With each night's carving, families stitch themselves into the fabric of their home, marking not only wood, but memory and belonging. In the gentle dark, the village settles into sleep. The barns stand quietly, sheltering more than animals and grain. Beneath their beams, stories linger, written in secret signs, carved for no eyes but those who would someday need them. It is in these silent, nearly invisible moments that the rhythm of inheritance is kept alive, and the past is gently carried forward, beam by beam, from one generation to the next. The practice of whispered remedies shared among trusted midwives. Imagine yourself in the gentle hush of an early morning, centuries ago, in a small village where the day begins with the slow kindling of the hearth. The air is cool, touched with the scent of damp thatch and faded herbs hanging from beams. Even before the sun lifts above the roofs, quiet shapes move from cottage to cottage, women wrapped in shawls, their steps soft upon the well-trodden path. In this quiet world, where distance from a market or a town means that help is often far away, a subtle but powerful network thrives. The circle of trusted midwives and wise women, bound together by knowledge and care, and by a shared sense of secrecy. Midwives are called by many names here, some formal, some spoken in a hush. Their skills are not confined to childbirth, though that is often the most visible mark of their work. These women know the landscape of the body as intimately as they know the paths between fields, and over long years, they have learned remedies for the aches and illnesses that settle in every household. Their knowledge is drawn from the land, roots pulled from the forest edge, leaves gathered by moonlight, a store of honey or fat, carefully wrapped and hidden. And just as often, their knowledge is drawn from one another, in whispers shared by the fireside or over the cradle of a sleeping child. Imagine yourself in a small cottage, where a midwife sits by the hearth, grinding dried herbs between her fingers, her motions unhurried and sure. The light is dim, filtered through oiled parchment or shuttered against the outside world. Here, a woman comes not just for help with a difficult birth, but for 100 small needs. A salve for a burn, a tea to calm a restless child, a poultice for a twisted ankle, a syrup for the lingering cough that sweeps the village each winter. The remedies are as varied as the ailments, and the trust that binds these women together is as vital as any ingredient. This trust is not lightly given. In an era shaped by suspicion, where the church might frown upon certain practices, and where outsiders may whisper of witchcraft, knowledge is passed only hand to hand, voice to ear, in careful secrecy. A new midwife is taught slowly, her lessons woven into ordinary chores, gathering yarrow along the ditch, mixing goose fat with thyme, brewing a gentle tonic from rosehips and honey. The recipes are never written, for paper is costly and eyes may wander. Instead, they are carried in memory, recited in the hush of night, repeated until the words are as natural as breathing. Sometimes, the remedies are simple, even humble. A warm compress of chamomile, or a soothing tea of lemon balm, eases pain and quiets fear. At other times, the recipes are more elaborate, layered, each step a quiet ritual of care. There are salves for fever, mixtures to encourage healing, tiny charms tied with red thread to hang over a cradle when illness passes through the village. Each remedy is a blend of observation, experience, and belief, a gentle assertion that the body can be coaxed, comforted, and sometimes, with patience, restored. The practice is marked by a rhythm as gentle as a lullaby. Women gather in twos or threes, always discreet, always mindful of who may be listening. Advice is exchanged with the flicker of a glance or a single word, a shorthand developed over years. "Try sage for the cough," one woman might murmur, passing a bundle beneath her shawl. Another might nod and later, when the time is right, share her own remedy, a way to ease labor pains, or to soften a scar. In this way, knowledge moves quietly through the village, always adapting, always growing. This network is especially important when physicians are scarce or distant. In many villages, the arrival of a doctor is a rare event, reserved for the wealthy or for crises that cannot be ignored. Foremost, health and healing are managed at home, by those whose skill is proven not by certificates, but by the lives they have comforted and saved. The wisdom of midwives is often the first, and sometimes the only, defense against the unpredictable hazards of daily life: fevers, injuries, childbirth, sorrow. There is an unspoken courage in this work. To give advice, to administer a remedy, is to shoulder risk, not only of failure, but of suspicion and accusation. Yet the practice endures, generation to generation, rooted in necessity and care. Even in times of fear, when rumors swirl and authorities grow watchful, the circle of midwives holds, quietly defiant, nurturing the health of their neighbors with the tools they have and the knowledge they trust. Over time, some remedies are lost, swept away by changing fashions or stricter laws. Others endure, tucked into the fabric of folk memory, emerging again when need is greatest. Even now, the descendants of these whispered recipes can be found: honey for a sore throat, mint to calm the stomach, lavender for restless sleep. They are reminders of a tradition shaped by quiet strength, by care given in secret, and by a faith in the gentle power of tending to one another. As you let this story settle, imagine yourself listening to the soft murmur of voices, the clink of wooden spoons in earthen bowls, the warmth of a room where women gather against the uncertainties of illness and isolation. The world outside may be ruled by suspicion, but inside these circles, comfort is found, in shared knowledge, in whispered remedies, in the steady, quiet work of keeping each other well. Let this gentle rhythm guide your thoughts, and as sleep draws near, remember that in every age, life has been sustained not only by grand discoveries, but by small acts of kindness, passed hand to hand, whispered from heart to heart, carrying hope across the silence of the years. The silent decision to abandon a failing field to save a family. Imagine yourself in the gentle blue half-light before dawn, when the world is quiet and the air is still heavy with night's last breath. The fields around you are empty, the soil hardened and bare, carrying only the faint promise of what once grew here. The house behind you, low, thatched, its windows dark, has been home to your family for as long as anyone remembers. Its stones have weathered countless storms, watched the slow passage of seasons, and held the warmth of generations who worked the land outside its door. For so many years, the rhythm of your life has been set by the pattern of those fields. Each spring began with hope, the planting of seeds, the careful watching of weather. There was a time when green rose unfurled across the earth, promising a harvest that would fill your cellar, feed your children, pay your rent or your tax. But the past few years have brought less rain, less sun, more stones surfacing where roots once took hold. Crops wither early, and those that grow are meager, stunted, never enough. Inside the house, the larder grows barer with each season. You can feel the worry in the hush around the table. Each mouthful is measured, every portion weighed against the weeks left until the next harvest. The air is thick with a quiet tension, the kind that seeps into dreams and turns them restless. As the earth gives less, you find yourself looking at the land not with hope, but with a heavy, searching gaze. You notice the cracks in the soil, the places where nothing will sprout. Your hands remember the feel of rich earth, but now they close around dust and stone. There are conversations whispered late at night, voices low so children won't wake, discussions about how long you can hold on, whether there is another way. It is in these hours that a silent decision takes shape. There is no dramatic proclamation, no gathering of neighbors to announce what must be done. Instead, there is a gradual acceptance, a quiet surrender that feels both bitter and necessary. Sometimes, it is the oldest who speak first, remembering other years of hunger, other families who left quietly, always before it was too late. Other times, it is the youngest who cannot hide their hollow eyes, whose needs are too clear to ignore. The act itself is as gentle and unremarkable as possible. On a morning chosen for its stillness, with no one watching, you gather what can be carried, some bedding, a few tools, whatever stores remain. The fields are left behind, their furrows empty, the stones marking years of labor and hope. Neighbors may guess what has happened, but in these times, such departures are understood. No one speaks of it aloud, but everyone knows that walking away is sometimes the only way to save those you love. There is a quiet dignity in this choice. To abandon the land is not to give up, but to recognize the limits of endurance. The rhythm of their lives has shifted. Now, survival means letting go of what cannot be saved. Families walk away from fields that have claimed their sweat and hope, moving toward a future that is unknown, but not yet foreclosed. You can imagine the silence that lingers in those empty fields. The earth remembers the footsteps, the laughter, the arguments and songs, the rituals of planting and harvest. In time, someone else may come, a neighbor who risks another season, or perhaps the land will rest, waiting for rain, for change, for another chance. But for those who have left, the horizon is now ahead, not behind. As you picture this moment, notice the small details, the hush of dawn, the creak of a loaded cart, the way the house seems to watch the family go. There is no spectacle here, no crowds to witness the decision. Just the measured steps of people doing what is necessary, quietly carrying their past into an uncertain day. The history books seldom mention these choices. They record great migrations, famines, the names of places emptied by drought or blight. But they rarely describe the slow, internal reckoning, the careful weighing of loss and hope, the silent decision to leave before the land takes everything. Yet it is these quiet acts that shape the course of families and the memory of villages. Sometimes, years later, stories are told about the family who left one dawn, about the field that stood empty until grass reclaimed its edges. The rhythm of their lives, broken and remade, echoes quietly in the stories passed down, reminders that survival often depends not on holding fast, but on knowing when to walk away. As you settle into sleep, imagine the stillness left behind, the fields resting, the old house watching the changing light, and the hope carried forward by those who, in the quietest hour, found the courage to choose a different path. The hidden compartments built into ovens to shield small stores. Imagine yourself in the early hours of morning, within the heart of a modest cottage. The kitchen is still, the world outside silent except for the faint song of waking birds and the distant creak of cartwheels on damp earth. It is here, in the thick-walled warmth of the hearth, that family life quietly unfolds. The oven, broad and deep, is more than a tool for daily bread. It is the keeper of secrets, the silent witness to generations of quiet ingenuity. Centuries ago, for many families, the oven stood at the center of home and survival. It was built with care, layers of brick and stone, shaped not only for baking but for endurance. In a world where tax collectors and local officials watched grain and fish as closely as coin, hiding even a small store could mean the difference between hunger and a season of relative comfort. And so, in the architecture of daily life, a subtle defiance took root, the creation of hidden compartments within the ovens themselves. These niches were clever and almost invisible, tucked behind bricks or beneath the oven floor, known only to those within the household. Some were large enough to hold a few sacks of grain, others just spacious enough for a pouch of salt, a wrapped bundle of dried fish, or a clutch of eggs. Their entrances were concealed by loose stones, soot-blackened tiles, or the thick shadow cast by an iron door. The knowledge of their presence was shared with care, spoken about only in trusted company, passed from parent to child as quietly as a bedtime story or a whispered blessing. Picture the slow, careful ritual of opening such a compartment. The oven is cool, its fire long spent. A certain brick, worn smooth by the touch of generations, is pressed and lifted aside. Within the cavity, the air is cool and dry, preserving what has been hidden, sometimes for weeks, sometimes only until the latest rumor of an inspection has passed. The smallest creak or scrape echoes in the quiet room, yet there is a comfort in the secrecy, a sense that cleverness and caution have become their own form of family inheritance. The rhythm of concealment and revelation weaves itself into daily life. Before the oven is stoked for baking, the secret niche must be checked, its contents either removed or shifted further back. Children grow up watching these movements. The brief pause before the fire is laid, the careful gaze cast about the kitchen, the soft scrape of brick against brick. For them, the hidden compartment is as much a part of the oven as the scent of baking bread or the dance of firelight on the stone walls. These acts of concealment are not born only of fear, but of necessity and tradition. Taxes on grain or fish could be harsh and relentless, calculated not just to fund distant wars or the comforts of noble households, but also to remind villagers of their place in the order of things. To keep back a little was not rebellion, but a way of surviving within a system that often left too little for those who tilled the fields and mended the nets. The hidden oven compartments become family legends, their origins blurred by time. Some tales say a great-grandmother built the niche with her own hands, or that an ancestor once outsmarted a particularly zealous taxman by hiding all the season's salted fish beneath the hearth on the very day of inspection. The stories are retold quietly in winter, near the warmth of the oven itself, reminders of both vulnerability and resourcefulness. For outsiders, these secret spaces are invisible. Tax collectors arrive, their boots leaving traces on the kitchen flagstones, their questions polite but searching. They check the bins and sacks, count loaves and measure flour, but rarely suspect the oven's true design. Only in the company of trusted friends, or family grown old enough to share responsibility, does the compartment's existence become known, revealed with a mixture of pride and caution. Among the wealthier, the need for such cunning is less acute, their storehouses ample and their influence a shield against scrutiny. Yet even in grand kitchens, servants sometimes know of niches behind hearthstones, places to conceal a private loaf or a precious handful of sugar. The instinct to safeguard the basics of life transcends status and station. Archaeologists, when they uncover the remnants of these old kitchens, sometimes notice strange irregularities in oven walls or stones that seem newer than those around them. Occasionally, a cavity is discovered, empty now but bearing the unmistakable signs of use, soot stains, scratch marks, or the lingering scent of what once lay hidden. These small findings open a window onto the private world of rural survival, revealing the subtle boundary between the official story of a household and the lived reality of those who called it home. If you imagine yourself tending the oven, the heat on your face and the steady sound of a loaf rising, you may also sense the hush of secrecy layered into the bricks. The compartment is both a physical space and a symbol, a quiet act of resilience, a nod to the understanding that life is rarely as simple as the rules suggest. So the oven remains at the center of the home, its warmth nurturing, its stones sheltering more than bread. The secret compartments, handed down as legend, continue to hold their place in family memory, reminders that, even in times of scarcity and watchfulness, small acts of cleverness could help a family endure, one hidden store at a time. The quiet scribes who kept family histories in the margins, imagine a candlelit table in a small, cool room as the world outside fades into evening. The day's labor is done. The fire in the hearth has dwindled to soft orange coals. In the hush that settles across the village, there sits a figure at the edge of lamplight, bent quietly over a bundle of paper. While much of history's business happened in loud proclamations and official decrees, there was always another layer, quieter and closer to home. A layer of memory kept not for rulers or lords, but for families themselves, in neat lines and careful script. Long before mass literacy, the ability to read and write was rare and valued. Most village folk measured time by seasons and marked life's events with spoken stories or tokens. Yet in nearly every community, someone, a clerk, a priest, a merchant, or a teacher, had learned the steady art of writing. Often, these quiet scribes held little official power. Their names rarely appeared in chronicles. But their work, tucked away in the margins of ledgers, in battered notebooks, or even between the lines of prayer books, quietly preserved the history of entire families. The official records, kept by lords or their stewards, were blunt and impersonal. These pages captured taxes owed, acres measured, and fines levied, focusing on what could be counted or claimed. But the hidden notebooks, passed quietly from hand to hand, told a different story. Here, in the neat script of someone who took pride in precision, you might find the birth of a child recorded with a single line, the date of a marriage marked with care, or the somber notice of a loss remembered in the family's own words. There would be lists of debts and loans, careful tallies of what was borrowed in lean years, or gifts quietly repaid when harvests were kind. It was a humble work, mostly unseen. The scribe might write with ink made from crushed berries, or with charcoal sharpened to a point. The paper could be rough or, sometimes, a scrap of parchment salvaged from a discarded document. Some families used the same small book for generations, its cover worn thin and the pages soft from years of careful handling. In the margins, amid the accounts of barley sold or wool spun, would be notations only the family understood, signs of a cousin's return, the first calf born in spring, the memory of a harsh winter. By firelight, the scribe's hand moved steadily, copying not only names and dates but the mood of a year, the feeling of hope or uncertainty, the subtle triumph of endurance. Sometimes, space was left for future entries, as if the act of recording itself was a quiet wish for continuity. There was no grand audience for these pages, no expectation that anyone outside the family would ever care. Yet in the act of writing, something lasting was made, a bulwark against forgetting, a soft assertion that every life, no matter how humble, mattered enough to be remembered. The work was practical as well as sentimental. When disputes arose, over land, debts, or inheritance, these little books could be brought out and consulted. A line of neat script, witnessed and dated, might carry as much weight as any formal charter when memories failed or tempers ran high. In times of loss, the pages became a comfort, a way to hold onto those who had gone. Even debts and quarrels found their place, balanced in ink and, sometimes, in forgiveness written out with a steady hand. Not all scribes were outsiders to the families they recorded. Often, the role passed down within a household, from mother to daughter or father to son, each adding their own entries with careful pride. In other cases, a trusted neighbor or village teacher was called upon, valued for a clear hand and a patient ear. For these quiet chroniclers, the reward was rarely more than a loaf of bread, a mug of ale, or the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. Yet their work became a kind of gentle magic, making memory more solid, ensuring that time would not wash everything away. Over centuries, many of these hidden histories vanished, pages lost to damp or mice, books packed away and forgotten as families moved or changed. Yet some survived and their contents have surprised even modern scholars. In the margins of an old account book, a long-forgotten name. In the back of a prayer book, a line about a birth or a journey. Through these fragments, the soft voices of ordinary people echo, steadied by the hand of a scribe, carried forward against the gentle forgetting of the years. So, as you imagine the dim glow of a candle and the patient scratch of a quill, let your mind drift to those who quietly wrote in the margins, preserving the shape of a family, the rhythm of a village, and the gentle sweep of lives that might otherwise have vanished without a trace. Let this thought settle with you, that even in a world shaped by great events and loud decisions, history's true substance is often found in the margins, in the steady, careful work of those who believed that memory, like life itself, was worth keeping safe, line by line, through every turning season. The small ritual of passing bread crusts to neighbors in need. Imagine yourself in a quiet medieval village as the first gray light of morning touches the frost that clings to the eaves and garden plots. The village is just beginning to stir. Chimneys breathe out faint ribbons of smoke, and the bleat of a distant sheep carries through the stillness. Inside small, tightly clustered cottages, families gather at rough wooden tables, dividing out the day's bread. The bread is not the soft, leavened loaves familiar to many today, but a dense, coarse staple, its crusts often hard and browned from baking in the communal oven. Each bite is precious, the result of long hours in the fields, careful saving, and the unpredictable rhythm of harvest. Here, the simple act of breaking bread carries layers of meaning, and none more so than in the small, almost invisible gestures of care that pass from neighbor to neighbor. Imagine the oldest daughter, her hands chapped from cold water, breaking off the heel of yesterday's loaf, setting it aside. A mother, pausing, glances at the door before wrapping the crust in a scrap of linen. The gesture is unremarkable in its ordinariness, no ceremony, no words exchanged, but it is quietly significant. These crusts are not waste. In years of plenty, they might be ground into pottage or fed to chickens, but in the hungry months, when winter lingers and the stores grow thin, they become survival. Across the lane, behind a curtain of woven reeds, a neighbor's fire may be low, and the pantry nearly bare. Pride keeps many from asking for help, and the unspoken rules of the village preserve dignity as much as they offer aid. Thus, the The ritual of passing bread crusts is born, woven silently into the fabric of daily life. Picture the exchange, a gentle tap at a door, the soft creak of a hinge, and a hand slipping the crust onto a shelf, a bench, or even the threshold itself. Sometimes, it is done in early morning, before the village is truly awake. Other times, it happens at dusk, as families prepare for another long night. There are no thanks, no acknowledgement. If the crust disappears, it is understood, gratitude is implied, but never spoken. This silence is not coldness, but a careful kindness, preserving both the giver's humility and the recipient's pride. You can imagine the weight of that crust in the palm of a hand, the rough texture, the scent of smoke and grain, the memory of warmth from the communal oven. For the neighbor who receives it, the crust is more than food. It is proof that someone has noticed that even in the hardship and anonymity of village life, they are not alone. In this way, hunger is eased not only by the crust itself, but by the knowledge that the community's bonds are strong, their support woven into the quiet routine of the day. Bread is the thread that ties these lives together, from planting to harvest, from oven to table. In the darkest months, when flour is stretched with oats, beans, or even bits of ground acorn, every morsel is counted and cherished. To give even a crust away is an act of trust, faith that, when one's own larder is empty, the gift will be returned. Sometimes it is, sometimes it is not. The ritual continues regardless, a form of insurance far older and deeper than any written charter or lord's decree. The village itself seems to hold its breath in these exchanges. The cobblestone lanes are quiet, punctuated only by the distant call of a rooster or the crunch of feet on frost. Inside, the hearth glows faintly, a reminder that warmth and sustenance come not from one's own work alone, but from the network of small, persistent kindnesses shared with others. These gifts are not recorded, not tallied or celebrated. They slip beneath notice, becoming as much a part of daily life as the drawing of water or the mending of clothes. Children grow up learning this ritual, observing the quiet choreography of giving and receiving. A young boy, eyes wide with hunger, may one day find a crust waiting on his doorstep and learn in time to pass another along to someone else. The lesson is rarely spoken aloud, but it shapes the village as surely as any law. During times of hardship, when blight ruins crops, or illness thins the village, these silent gifts become even more vital. Hunger might visit every hearth, but despair rarely lingers when the knowledge persists that a neighbor will share even the smallest comfort. The crust, humble and unsung, becomes a symbol of stubborn hope, a promise that survival is not an individual struggle, but a communal effort. Even as fortunes change and new seasons bring new challenges, the ritual endures. It binds the community together with threads invisible but unbreakable. If you walk the lanes of the village long enough, you begin to see these quiet acts for what they are, a slow, patient resistance to the forces of isolation and want. As night falls, the scent of baking lingers in the cool air, and behind closed doors, hands reach for crusts saved from yesterday's loaf. Some will be eaten with soup or shared with children. Others, wrapped carefully, will find their way to a neighbor's home before dawn. In this way, the smallest act becomes a kind of blessing, repeated over years, over generations. A gentle assurance that in the hardest times, no one is truly left behind. As you drift into sleep, let your mind settle on the soft rhythm of these unseen gifts, the warmth of bread shared in silence, and the quiet strength of a village that endures, not by the size of its harvests, but by the depth of its care.